Because I think the thing that he said that sticks out about Shedeur is the same thing that you and I have said and why we enjoyed Shedeur's, was it 7 games that he played last year?
I think you see playmaking ability. I think you see a player that is confident in his skill set. So when you see that playmaking ability and inner confidence, you say, okay, there's something to work with there. So I think that's the thing that excites you. 15 or 20 years ago, they would have said that Shedeur Sanders was athletic. They would have said he could escape. Well, the game's changed so much to now he's not a mobile quarterback. No, he's mobile.
And different reports that has been coming out is that Shedeur Sanders has something no other quarterback has. That is the Cleveland Browns locker room. Now, we know Shedeur Sanders always make it his business to get acclimated and build a bond with his teammates.
The NFL thought they had solved the rookie problem decades ago. They created a salary cap. They standardized contracts. They controlled the narrative. For years, young players entered the league knowing exactly what they would earn, how long they would wait, and when they might finally get paid. The system was bulletproof, or so they believed. Then a 5th-round pick walked in with 0 expectations, and within weeks, he generated more revenue than most veterans earn in their entire careers. His name is Shedeur Sanders, and what he just did was not supposed to be possible. This is not a story about football statistics or on-field performance, although those matter. This is a story about power shifting in an industry that thought power could never shift. This is about an athlete who quietly rewrote the rules before anyone realized the game had changed. And this is about why executives across the league are having uncomfortable conversations behind closed doors, realizing their system just got broken by someone they drafted to sit on the bench. Everyone thought they understood the 5th-round narrative. It was simple, predictable, maybe even boring. A young quarterback gets drafted late. He sits behind veterans. He learns the system quietly. Maybe, if he's lucky, he gets a few snaps in garbage time. He becomes a backup for 3 years, and if he shows promise, he gets a chance to start. That is how the system works. That is how it has always worked. The Cleveland Browns drafted Shedeur Sanders with the 144th pick overall, and honestly, nobody expected much. Not because he lacked talent, but because the story felt familiar. Late-round picks are not supposed to disrupt billion-dollar ecosystems. They are not supposed to flip financial structures that have remained stable for decades. They are supposed to be patient, humble, and grateful for the opportunity. But something was different about Sanders from the moment he stepped into the building. It was not arrogance. It was confidence. And there is a massive difference between the two, although many around the league could not see it. When he talked about his abilities, he was not bragging. He was stating facts backed up by footage from Colorado, where he had dominated at the collegiate level with a swagger that reminded people of someone they had seen before. His father, Deion Sanders, had turned personality and performance into a cultural force decades earlier. The genes were there. The mentality was there. But the timing was everything. Within weeks of his preseason debut, something unexpected happened. It was not a dramatic moment. It was not a scandal or a controversial interview. It started with a number that made no sense to anyone inside the league. A 5th-round rookie, barely expected to see the field early, walked in and quietly triggered a surge that nobody could explain fast enough. The number was so large that seasoned executives had to double-check their math. The number was $250 million. That was the total in rookie jersey sales generated almost exclusively by Shedeur Sanders' name alone. To understand why this matters, you need to understand what that number means in context. Rookie jersey sales are typically modest. A young player drafted early might see his jersey sell in the thousands, maybe tens of thousands during his first season. But $250 million? That was not just unexpected. It was unprecedented. It was the kind of number that should have been impossible for someone who had never thrown a regular season pass. The commission from those sales alone landed him approximately $14 million, which is more than triple the total value of his entire 4-year rookie contract, worth $4.6 million. Let that sink in. Before he had completed even one NFL game, before he had faced real defenses, before he had thrown a touchdown pass that actually counted, he had out-earned the entire structure that was supposed to control his financial future. And he did it without an elaborate endorsement campaign. He did not need 30-second television spots during the Super Bowl. He did not need celebrity appearances or massive marketing budgets. He did it by being the right athlete, with the right name, at the right moment, partnered with the right brand. The panic did not begin with a loss or a scandal or some dramatic front office decision. It started with that number. Because that number represented something the league had never fully confronted before, a player generating value completely outside their control system. The NFL could regulate what he earned as a salary. They could enforce salary caps and rookie wage scales and collective bargaining agreements. But they could not regulate what consumers were willing to pay for his jersey. They could not control the market that was forming around his identity independent of his actual performance on the field. What looked like a routine draft pick in the 5th round had turned into a financial disruption in real time. And now, the league was stuck confronting a reality where a player with 0 regular season snaps was already outpacing veterans in commercial value. Executives who had spent their entire careers managing talent within a controlled framework suddenly had no framework for what was happening. The most uncomfortable part was understanding where this came from. It was not organic hype. It was not random fans deciding to buy his jersey. It was calculated. It was strategic. It was a company that had already made a bet on this kid years earlier, and now they were collecting on that investment in ways that challenged the fundamental power structure of professional sports. That company was Nike, and they had been playing a completely different game the entire time. This was the moment everything shifted, not when Shedeur Sanders stepped on the field. Not when he made a great throw or led a game-winning drive. It was when the jersey sales numbers came in and the league realized they had lost control of something they thought was untouchable. And the worst part? The story was just getting started. Most teams approach rookies the same way. They draft them. They sign them to standardized contracts. They put them into a system and hope they develop. The narrative is always controlled by the franchise. The team decides when to promote the player. The team decides how to market him. The team decides what story gets told about his future. This has been the model for decades. It works because players have limited leverage as rookies. They cannot negotiate their salary. They cannot demand where they play. They exist within a structure that has been designed to maximize organizational control while minimizing player power. Nike saw this system, and they decided to approach it completely differently. While other brands were waiting to see what happened on draft night, Nike was already moving. Back in 2024, when Shedeur Sanders was still dominating at the collegiate level at Colorado, they signed him as their first nil football athlete. This was not about selling a few cleats, because it was about building a brand that could evolve into a cultural force. It was a calculated bet on a player that most of the NFL had not yet seriously evaluated. The decision was remarkable because it went against conventional wisdom. Usually, brands wait for validation from the league. They wait for draft positioning. They wait for performance. They wait for the market to decide whether a player is worth investing in. Nike did the opposite. They were not reacting to the system. They were creating their own validation system independent of what the NFL thought. This strategy had a blueprint, and that blueprint came from his father. Shedeur Sanders had already shown the world how to turn personality, performance, and style into a marketing empire decades earlier. He was an athlete first, but he was equally effective as a cultural figure. He understood that the money was not just in being great at football. The money was in being unavoidable in culture. In being the person everyone wanted to talk about, wear like, emulate. Nike saw echoes of that same potential in Shedeur Sanders, and they decided to act early before the league could lock him down within their traditional framework. The strategy was not subtle once you understood it. Back in 2024, Nike broke their usual silence on social media to spotlight him. They rolled out custom cleats. They teased exclusive sneakers. They built an entire campaign that connected his college dominance to his professional future. The message was clear. We are not waiting for the league to validate him. We are creating our own validation system. We are positioning him as more than just a football player. We are positioning him as a cultural figure before he ever takes an NFL snap. Most executives inside the league dismissed this approach as risky. They saw a player with questions about his pro readiness, questions about whether his college success would translate, questions about his mechanics and his mentality. They saw risk. Nike saw something different. They saw a kid with the genes, the confidence, the platform, and the work ethic to become something bigger than football. They saw what happened when a talented athlete had a famous father, media attention, and access to resources. They saw someone who could become unavoidable. By the time the draft arrived, Nike was all in. They had already invested resources. They had already built infrastructure. They had already created a narrative around him that existed completely independent of what the Cleveland Browns or any other team might do. This was crucial because it meant that when draft night arrived and Shedeur Sanders unexpectedly slid to the 5th round, Nike did not panic. Instead, they accelerated. The timing was perfect because his unexpected fall in the draft only increased the narrative tension. Anonymous executives had questioned his attitude. They had questioned his focus. They had suggested that he cared more about branding than football. They had pointed to his confidence and labeled it arrogance. They had created a story that painted him as difficult to manage, as someone whose priorities were misaligned with what the league valued. This narrative could have crushed a traditional athlete. This narrative could have derailed his entire career before it started. But Nike had already positioned him above the draft narrative. They had already created an alternative story. While teams were internally debating whether to invest in him, Nike was already building the ecosystem that would make him valuable regardless of what any single team did. This is the key insight that most people miss. Nike was not betting on Shedeur Sanders becoming a Pro Bowl quarterback. They were betting on him becoming a cultural figure. They were betting that his name, his image, his brand, and his personality would generate value in the marketplace independent of his on-field performance. This approach represented a fundamental shift in how endorsements work in professional sports. Instead of reacting to success, Nike was creating success by investing in the right person at the right time with the right strategy. They were not selling a product. They were building an ecosystem. And that ecosystem was designed to exist whether the NFL liked it or not. The uncomfortable part for the league was that this strategy worked. And once it worked, it became impossible to ignore. Because if Nike could do this for Shedeur Sanders, what stopped them from doing it for the next prospect? What stopped other brands from adopting the same strategy? What stopped the entire power structure from shifting permanently? Draft Night 2025 should have been a celebration. Shedeur Sanders was supposed to be a 1st or 2nd round selection. That was the expectation. That was the narrative leading into the event. He was a Power 5 quarterback from a prestigious program. His father was a Pro Football Hall of Famer. He had completed a dominant college season. Everything pointed to an early selection that would validate the hype and set him up for immediate opportunity within an NFL organization. Instead, draft night became the moment when everyone realized how badly the league had misread the situation. Round after round passed. Players at other positions were selected. Teams passed on him repeatedly. The slide was not a matter of a few picks. It was not a matter of him falling from the 1st round to the 2nd round. By the time the 5th round arrived, Shedeur Sanders was still on the board. The Cleveland Browns selected him at pick 144 overall, and the criticism reached a fever pitch almost immediately. Analysts questioned everything. They questioned his mechanics, suggesting his footwork was not quite pro-ready. They questioned his consistency, pointing out that he had bad moments mixed in with brilliant ones. They questioned his mentality, insinuating that his confidence bordered on arrogance, that he cared more about his brand than about winning football games. The narrative was not kind. The narrative was designed to explain why a player with his pedigree had fallen so far. And the narrative was pushed by people with credibility inside the league, by scouts and analysts and executives who claimed to understand what they were seeing. What made this moment crucial is that most athletes fold under this pressure. When the entire industry questions your worth, when anonymous executives start leaking stories about your attitude, when the media narrative turns negative before you have even practiced with your team, most people retreat. They try to prove everyone wrong by working harder, by keeping their head down, by staying quiet. They accept the lower draft position as validation that maybe they are not as good as they thought. Shedeur Sanders did something different. He did not fight the narrative publicly. He did not go on podcasts to defend himself. He did not engage in social media battles or issue angry statements about disrespect. Instead, he remained relatively quiet. And that silence was strategic in ways that most people did not immediately understand. In a media-driven environment where every slight generates a response, silence creates more curiosity than confrontation. Silence lets people fill in the blanks with their own assumptions. Silence allows the work to speak louder than words ever could. But here is where the story takes a turn that executives should have seen coming. Nike did not flinch during draft night. If anything, they accelerated. While teams were internally debating whether they had made a mistake in passing on him, Nike was already planning their response. They understood something fundamental that the league had missed. A fifth-round pick with a famous name, Nike backing, and elite-level talent was actually a better narrative than an early first-round selection. It was a redemption story. It was an underdog story. It was exactly the kind of story that generates cultural attention and drives consumer behavior. The strategy shifted. Instead of positioning Shedeur Sanders as a consensus top prospect, Nike positioned him as the player the league got wrong. This is a subtle but powerful difference in narrative framing. When you are a highly drafted prospect, expectations are enormous. Pressure is immense. Every mistake is magnified because you were supposed to be special. But when you are a fifth-round pick who fell further than expected, every positive moment becomes proof that doubters were wrong. Every impressive play becomes vindication. Every success becomes a story of overcoming. Anonymous executives inside the league had pushed narratives designed to explain the slide. They suggested his priorities were misaligned. They questioned whether he had the right mentality for professional football. They created a story that made the fifth-round slide seem logical, even predictable. But this narrative created a weakness that Nike immediately exploited. If the league was saying his priorities were on branding over football, then any moment he showed up and performed would be framed as proof that the league was wrong. The confidence that had been labeled arrogance during the pre-draft process suddenly looked different when he was competing against professional-level athletes. The focus on building his brand suddenly looked smart when those brand investments started generating massive returns. The personality that executives had questioned suddenly looked like exactly what the market wanted. Nike had not changed anything about Shedeur Sanders. They had simply changed the context in which people evaluated him. What made this brilliant was the timing. The fifth-round slide created the perfect setup for a comeback narrative. Nike understood that narratives drive value in professional sports more than actual talent sometimes does. Everyone at the draft knew Shedeur Sanders could play. What they did not expect was for him to be positioned as the story nobody saw coming. Not the consensus first-round prospect, but the fifth-round redemption arc. Not the heir apparent, but the kid who was going to prove everyone wrong. The most uncomfortable part for the league was realizing that they had inadvertently helped Nike. By pushing negative narratives, by spreading doubts, by questioning his mentality and priorities, they had created the perfect setup for an underdog story. And underdog stories drive engagement. Underdog stories drive sales. Underdog stories make people want to be part of something bigger than themselves. Preseason games are usually forgettable. They are filled with backups and young players trying to make rosters. The starters play limited snaps. The intensity is deliberately held back. Nobody wants to get injured in a game that does not count. The broadcasting is often low-key. The attendance is sparse. It is the part of the NFL calendar that most fans skip over completely. But preseason games are also the first real evaluation opportunity for prospects, especially late-round picks who are far down the depth chart. Shedeur Sanders did not get early opportunities in preseason. He did not get reps in training camp. The Cleveland Browns, like most organizations, were cautious with their draft picks. He was a fifth-rounder. There were other quarterbacks ahead of him on the depth chart. There were experienced veterans who had already proven they could function in the system. So Shedeur Sanders sat. He watched. He waited for his moment. And when that moment finally came, he was ready in a way that nobody could have predicted. Against Carolina in preseason action, everything changed. This was not a dominant performance by preseason standards. This was a dominant performance by any standard. He completed 14 passes for 138 yards and 2 touchdowns. He moved with purpose. He threw with precision. He made decisions with a level of composure and confidence that did not match the narrative that had been built around him during the draft process. More importantly, he did it against players who were actually professional athletes, not college players. He did it in a system he was still learning. He did it with limited preparation. The performance itself was impressive, but the timing of what happened next was strategic genius. Within hours of his preseason appearance, Nike dropped a campaign built around his signature celebration. They did not wait for the season to start. They did not wait for regular season validation. They released marketing materials immediately, capitalizing on the momentum of his performance while the moment was still fresh and social media was still buzzing. The response was immediate and explosive. Millions of impressions, hundreds of thousands of engagements. A surge in attention that translated directly into sales. Jerseys began flying off shelves at a pace the league had never seen from a rookie in his position. Content built around him started outperforming expectations. People who had no connection to the Cleveland Browns were suddenly interested in his story. People who did not follow football closely were suddenly asking who this kid was and why everyone was talking about him. What made this moment crucial is understanding that Nike did not simply sell merchandise during this window. They built an entire product ecosystem around him. There were multiple price tiers designed to capture different audiences. There were affordable graphic shirts for casual fans who wanted to support him without major investment. There were premium, authentic jerseys for dedicated supporters willing to spend more. There were youth versions for parents who wanted their children wearing his name. There were women's fits that opened up entire market segments the league had traditionally overlooked. And there were limited edition footwear releases priced at the top of the market for collectors and enthusiasts who wanted exclusive access. This strategic layering of products was not accidental. It was designed to capture consumer behavior across every demographic. A single preseason performance became a multi-channel revenue event. A fifth-round pick became a commercial phenomenon. The NFL was watching this unfold and slowly realizing that they had underestimated something fundamental. They had underestimated the power of narrative combined with smart marketing combined with actual performance. But here is what made it even more dangerous. The performance was real. This was not hype without substance. This was not marketing creating value for an empty product. Shedeur Sanders had actually gone out and done something impressive on the field. That combination is nearly impossible to stop. You can dismiss marketing, you can question narrative, but you cannot argue with on-field performance. When you have both, the value becomes undeniable. The preseason performance also served another purpose. It validated Nike's early bet on him. It proved that the brand did not make a mistake when they signed him before the draft. It proved that the strategy of investing early, building infrastructure, and positioning him as a cultural figure was sound. And most importantly, it proved that the league had been wrong about him. The anonymous executives who questioned his mentality, his focus, his priorities, they had all been wrong. From a business perspective, what happened during that preseason window was a masterclass in execution. You have a product that nobody expected to be valuable. You have a moment when that product suddenly demonstrates legitimacy. You capitalize on that moment immediately with coordinated marketing across multiple channels. You give consumers multiple ways to participate at different price points. You build momentum before anyone can question whether the moment was sustainable. The numbers that followed were staggering because they represented real consumer demand. This was not artificial hype that would disappear after 1 week. People were actively choosing to spend money on Shedeur Sanders merchandise. Parents were buying youth jerseys. Collectors were buying limited edition footwear. The marketplace had decided that his name had value. And in capitalism, the marketplace is always right. Numbers tell stories. Sometimes they tell stories that make people deeply uncomfortable. The numbers generated by Shedeur Sanders' rookie jersey sales told a story that the NFL could not ignore, could not spin, and could not explain away through traditional narrative frameworks. The number was $250 million in total rookie jersey sales. That number needed to be understood in context to grasp why every executive in the league suddenly paid attention. To understand why this matters, you need to understand historical benchmarks. A typical high draft pick, someone selected in the first round of the NFL draft, might generate jersey sales in the range of $500,000 to maybe $2 million in their entire first year. These are elite prospects. These are players that entire franchises are built around. These are household names from famous college programs, and they typically generate jersey sales measured in millions, not hundreds of millions. Shedeur Sanders generated $250 million in jersey sales as a fifth-round pick who had not thrown a single regular season pass. The number was so far outside historical precedent that it required explanation. It required understanding. It required the league to confront something they had never had to confront before. The number was not just large. The number was revolutionary. Breaking down the financial structure reveals why this matters so much. The commission from those $250 million in sales landed Shedeur Sanders approximately $14 million in direct compensation. That $14 million came before he ever played in a regular season game. That $14 million was 3 times the total value of his entire 4-year rookie contract with the Cleveland Browns, which was worth $4.6 million combined. Let that sink in. He earned more in commission from merchandise sales in a matter of weeks than his entire rookie contract guaranteed him over 4 years. This comparison is crucial because it exposed a fundamental problem with the traditional NFL compensation structure. The rookie wage scale was designed during a different era, when athletes' value was primarily determined by their on-field performance, and their marketability was controlled almost entirely by their teams. A team could decide when to feature a player in marketing materials. A team could decide how aggressively to promote a player's brand. A team controlled the narrative around a player's image. But what happened with Shedeur Sanders shattered this control. His value was not being generated by the Cleveland Browns marketing department. His value was being generated by consumer demand independent of the team's efforts. The Browns did not need to spend money promoting him. The market was promoting him. Consumers were choosing to buy his merchandise because they wanted it, not because they were being persuaded by clever advertising. This raises a question that made executives uncomfortable. If a player can generate this level of revenue independent of his team, then what is the actual value of the traditional rookie contract structure? If the market is willing to pay $14 million in commissions to a player for merchandise carrying his name, then is a $4.6 million rookie contract actually reflecting his real value? The answer was clearly no. The answer exposed the system as outdated and obsolete. The real innovation, however, was not just that Shedeur Sanders generated massive sales. The real innovation was the mechanism through which he participated in those sales. His deal included something called the Prime Equity Clause, and this clause fundamentally changed how a player participates in money generated by his own name. Instead of simply earning a salary and letting the team and the apparel manufacturer pocket the rest of the profit, Shedeur Sanders negotiated a percentage of revenue tied directly to his name, image, and likeness. This includes merchandise sales, sponsorships, and media content built around him. This includes everything connected to his identity. In simple terms, he was no longer just an employee of the franchise. He was a business partner in the ecosystem built around his identity. The difference is profound. An employee earns a salary. A business partner participates in profits. An employee's income is capped. A business partner's income scales with the value they create. Many teams had initially dismissed this clause as unrealistic. They believed that a 5th-round pick would not have the leverage to demand equity in his own name. They believed that traditional contract structures would hold firm. They believed that the system that had worked for decades would continue to work indefinitely. They were wrong. And the proof was $14 million in commission generated before he played his first regular season game. The Prime Equity Clause represented a new model for athlete compensation. Instead of fighting about salary within a cap system, players could now potentially earn more money through their personal brand value than through their team salary. This changed the incentive structure. This meant that an athlete's priority shifted from maximizing team performance alone to also maximizing personal brand value. This meant that image, visibility, social media engagement, and cultural relevance became as important as football performance. For the league, this was terrifying. Because it meant that traditional mechanisms of control, the salary cap, the rookie wage scale, standardized contracts, were becoming less effective at controlling a player's total compensation. A player could now potentially earn more outside their team's salary than inside it. A player could potentially become more valuable to brands than to franchises. A player could potentially leverage their personal brand to negotiate better terms than the system intended to allow. The $250 million in jersey sales and the $14 million in commissions were not just numbers. They were proof that the system was breaking. They were proof that the market was willing to value these athletes beyond what the league wanted to pay them. They were proof that smart brand partnerships could circumvent traditional power structures. And they were proof that once one player figured out how to do this, other players would follow. Most merchandise strategies are simple. A company makes a product. They distribute it through retail channels. They hope people buy it. Success or failure is measured in total units sold. But the Nike strategy around Shedeur Sanders was far more sophisticated. It was not about moving units. It was about building an entire ecosystem of products, price points, and distribution channels that captured consumer behavior across every demographic segment. The strategy started with understanding consumer psychology. Different people have different levels of commitment and different levels of disposable income. Some fans want to support a player but cannot afford to spend $50 on a premium jersey. Other fans are willing to spend $100 or more on authentic, game-quality equipment. Some consumers want to participate in the cultural moment but are not die-hard followers. Other consumers are collectors who will pay premium prices for limited edition products unavailable to the general public. Nike designed their product ecosystem to capture all of these consumer segments simultaneously. They offered affordable graphic t-shirts with Shedeur Sanders' name and number, priced to encourage casual fans to participate without major financial commitment. They offered authentic replica jerseys, priced higher for serious supporters willing to invest more. They created youth versions specifically designed for parents who wanted their children wearing his name, opening up an entirely new market segment. They created women's fits with tailored cuts and sizing designed for female fans, another demographic the league had traditionally underserved. And then they went further. They developed limited edition footwear releases priced at the absolute top of the market for collectors and enthusiasts. These were not shoes meant for everyday wear. These were investment pieces, collector's items, products designed to be rare, desirable, and expensive. People were willing to spend hundreds of dollars on limited edition shoes carrying Shedeur Sanders' brand because the exclusivity made them valuable. This multi-tier approach was brilliant because it meant that every consumer segment had an entry point. No matter what your budget was, there was a Shedeur Sanders product you could buy. And if you spent $10 on a graphic shirt, there was a pathway to eventually spending $100 on a premium jersey and potentially $500 on limited edition footwear. The ecosystem was designed to be expansive and inclusive while simultaneously maximizing total revenue capture. What made this strategy even more sophisticated was understanding that the ecosystem would continue to expand. Nike mentioned that a signature shoe line was already in development. This was not a one-time opportunity. This was the foundation for a long-term brand build-out. A signature shoe line would place Shedeur Sanders in rare company. Only the most iconic athletes get signature shoes. Michael Jordan, LeBron James, a few basketball players, a few soccer players, but a rookie NFL quarterback, that was unprecedented. The development of a signature shoe line would further blur the line between athlete and entrepreneur. He would no longer be a player endorsing a Nike product. He would be a designer of products bearing his name. He would be involved in the creation, development, and positioning of shoes that carried his brand. He would be a businessman first and an athlete second in the commercial space. This is the evolution of athlete empowerment. This is what happens when athletes stop being content for marketing campaigns and become actual business partners in product development. The genius of the ecosystem was that it did not require the Cleveland Browns to do anything. The team did not need to spend marketing resources. The team did not need to coordinate with Nike on strategy. The team did not even need to fully embrace Shedeur Sanders as their starting quarterback for the ecosystem to work. The ecosystem existed independent of the team. It existed independent of on-field performance. It existed in the marketplace, driven by consumer demand and brand loyalty. This is the uncomfortable truth that executives had to confront. A player could potentially be more valuable in the marketplace than on the field. A player's brand could be more profitable than his salary. A player's commercial appeal could exceed his sports performance value. This had implications far beyond Shedeur Sanders. This had implications for how the entire league would operate in the future. Consider what happens when a top 3 draft pick sees this model and demands similar equity. Consider what happens when agents across the league start studying the prime equity clause structure and pushing for similar terms. Consider what happens when other brands see Nike's success and start identifying their own prospects to invest in before the draft. The entire power structure of the league shifts. The control mechanisms that have held firm for decades suddenly become less effective. The ecosystem strategy also highlighted something else important. Modern consumer behavior is driven by authenticity, narrative, and cultural relevance. People do not buy Shedeur Sanders jerseys because the Cleveland Browns marketing department told them to. They buy them because he represents something compelling. They buy them because his story is interesting. They buy them because his rise from a fifth-round pick to a cultural phenomenon feels real. They buy them because they want to be part of a movement. This is fundamentally different from how traditional athlete endorsements work. Traditional endorsements are built on top-down messaging. A brand pays an athlete to sell a product. The company creates advertising. The company controls the narrative, but the Shedeur Sanders ecosystem was more organic. It was built on bottom-up consumer demand. It was driven by people actively choosing to participate because they believed in the product and the story. Nike understood this intuitively. They understood that in modern culture, authenticity is more valuable than polish. A genuine story beats a manufactured narrative. Organic engagement beats paid advertising. So they built an ecosystem that felt real, that felt like a cultural moment, rather than a marketing campaign. And that approach turned $250 million in merchandise sales into proof that the business world had fundamentally changed. The statistics looked good on the surface. That was the first problem the Cleveland Browns faced. Shedeur Sanders' preseason performance had been impressive by any objective measure. 14 completions for 138 yards, 2 touchdowns, a passer rating that stood out among quarterbacks competing for roster spots. The numbers were real. The performance was real. But football decisions are not made in a vacuum. They are made within the context of organizational structures, depth charts, veteran relationships, and long-term planning that extends far beyond a single preseason game. Inside the Browns organization, the situation was complex. Shedeur Sanders was competing in a crowded quarterback room that included experienced veterans and other young prospects. There was Deshaun Watson, an established quarterback that the franchise had committed to financially. There were other prospects with more experience in the system. There were players who had invested years into learning the team's playbook. The decision about Shedeur Sanders' role could not be made solely on preseason performance. It had to account for organizational priorities, depth chart considerations, contract commitments, and long-term vision. But there was another dynamic at play that executives had not fully anticipated. Shedeur Sanders was actively building relationships with his teammates. He was not sitting quietly, waiting for opportunity. He was in the building early. He was participating in team activities. He was getting acclimated and building bonds with his teammates. This is something that scouts specifically mentioned. He was approaching his role like someone who belonged, not someone who was grateful to be there. He was acting like the quarterback of this team going forward, not like a backup fighting for scraps. This approach had consequences. Some veterans might have felt threatened. Some coaches might have wondered whether he was focused on the right things. Some executives might have questioned whether his priorities were aligned with the team's timeline. But his teammates seemed to respond to it. His competitiveness seemed to drive them. His confidence seemed to elevate the people around him. The locker room impact was positive, even if it created complexity for decision-making. The performance versus projection problem was real and difficult. His passer rating had outpaced competitors in the quarterback room. His efficiency metrics had stood out. His ability to generate attention and excitement had added a layer of value that extended beyond football statistics. But efficiency in preseason games is not the same as execution in regular season games. A few impressive snaps against defensive backups and rotational players is not the same as sustained performance against elite competition. The margin for error was enormous, and everyone knew it. The team was caught between two competing narratives. On one hand, he had performed well enough that benching him entirely would face criticism if he became successful elsewhere. Imagine if the Browns released him or relegated him to third string, and he somehow became a star quarterback for another team. That decision would haunt the organization forever. On the other hand, rushing him into the starting role without sufficient preparation could damage his long-term development and potentially harm the team's competitive success. Reports surfaced that general manager Andrew Barry and head coach Todd Monken were focusing heavily on the offensive line at the draft. Specifically, they were looking to strengthen the left tackle position. This suggested that internal conversations about quarterback futures might have shifted. If the team was genuinely planning to develop Shedeur Sanders long-term, then protecting his blind spot was critical. You do not invest in offensive line protection for a backup quarterback. You invest in those resources for someone you believe has a future. But there was institutional resistance that nobody was talking about publicly. Deshaun Watson was there. He was established. He had been with the team. The team had made financial commitments to him. You cannot simply move on from that investment because a fifth-round pick had an impressive preseason performance. The optics would be terrible. The financial implications would be massive. The message it would send about organizational stability would be damaging. So the Browns were stuck in a holding pattern. Shedeur Sanders had performed well enough that they could not completely ignore him. But institutional momentum was powerful enough that they could not simply install him as the starter. The team had to navigate this space carefully, which meant carefully managing expectations, maintaining clarity about depth chart positioning, and making decisions that served the organization's long-term interests rather than short-term drama. What made this situation unique was that the external pressure was immense. Nike was building his brand. The media was building a narrative. Consumers were buying his merchandise. The league was paying attention. The team could not control the external ecosystem anymore. They could only control their internal decisions, and those internal decisions would be scrutinized relentlessly. One factor that everybody understood was the injury risk. Shedeur Sanders had not played meaningful football at the professional level. He had not taken hits from NFL defensive linemen. He had not been in situations where he needed to make split-second decisions under pressure against elite athletes. One significant injury could change everything. One concussion could derail his career completely. You do not throw a young quarterback into that situation without careful consideration. The locker room dynamics were positive, but they were also unpredictable. How would veterans respond if a rookie suddenly got elevated above them? How would the team cohesion be affected if decisions seemed driven by external factors rather than internal merit? These were real concerns that had to be managed. Football teams are businesses, but they are also communities. And community disruption can damage performance. Every major system has breaking points. Every established structure has vulnerability. Once someone figures out how to exploit that vulnerability, the whole system becomes vulnerable to others using the same exploit. This is true in cybersecurity. This is true in economics. This is true in professional sports. And Shedeur Sanders just showed the entire NFL exactly where the vulnerability was located. Agents across the league began studying the structure behind Shedeur Sanders' deal almost immediately. They were not studying it casually. They were breaking down the mechanics of the prime equity clause. They were understanding how it worked. They were calculating how it could be adapted and applied to other situations. And they were asking a dangerous question that no executive wanted to hear out loud. What happens when a top 3 draft pick demands the same thing with even more leverage? It is one thing to watch a fifth-round rookie force his way into this position. The narrative around him created a unique situation. He had fallen in the draft. Nike had invested early. He had a famous father. He had a compelling story. All of these factors combined to create a specific set of circumstances that might not be repeatable. Executives could potentially convince themselves that this was an outlier, a unique situation that would not become the standard. But it becomes an entirely different crisis if a future franchise quarterback walks into draft negotiations expecting equity from day one. A prospect selected in the top 3 overall picks walks in with leverage that Shedeur Sanders did not have. They are expected to be franchise cornerstones. Teams have invested in them long before draft day. The pressure to sign them is immense. If that prospect's representation says, "We want the prime equity clause included, we want percentage-based revenue sharing, we want our client to be a business partner, not just an employee," then what do? Teams could refuse. They could say no. They could insist on traditional contract structures. But then they risk that prospect sitting out. They risk public relations disasters. They risk other teams offering the equity clause to get the deal done. They risk setting a narrative that their organization is antiquated, inflexible, and unwilling to adapt to modern athlete expectations. The leverage suddenly shifts in ways that were not supposed to be possible. Nike, meanwhile, was already moving ahead as if the future had been decided. There were internal discussions about scaling Shedeur Sanders' brand globally. The discussion was not just about football anymore. The discussion was expanding beyond apparel into lifestyle products. The discussion was about positioning him alongside the most recognizable faces in sports culture rather than just football. They were thinking years ahead, building an infrastructure that would support him as a global brand, not just an NFL player. This is the long-term vision that made executives uncomfortable. A top athlete with a global brand eventually outgrows sports. They become cultural figures. They become business icons. They become entrepreneurs. Their primary income is no longer their salary. Their primary income is their brand. At that point, whether they are playing football becomes almost secondary. At that point, the sport is just a platform for something much larger. Consider the implications. If athletes increasingly view their sports salary as a small percentage of their total income, then their priorities shift, their focus shifts, their decision-making framework changes. Teams can no longer simply control athletes through salary structure because salary is no longer the primary wealth driver. Athletes become less dependent on their teams. Athletes become more independent. The balance of power fundamentally shifts. This is why the precedent problem is so dangerous. Once one athlete figures out how to build parallel revenue streams through equity participation, other athletes will demand the same. Once one team agrees to an equity clause, other teams will face pressure to match it. Once it becomes normal for athletes to participate in revenue tied to their name, image, and likeness, the entire compensation structure of professional sports changes permanently. The margin for error in Shedeur Sanders' immediate future is smaller than most people realize because the stakes extend far beyond individual success. Right now, he stands at the center of something much larger than a rookie season. He represents a test case for a new model of athlete empowerment, one where players are not just participants in the system, but stakeholders in the value they create. Every decision he makes, every performance he delivers, every deal he signs contributes to a broader conversation about the future of sports economics. The league knows this. The executives know this. They understand that they are watching a template being created in real time. They understand that this template will be copied. They understand that their ability to control athlete compensation through traditional mechanisms is eroding. And they understand that they have very limited ability to stop it without appearing to be fighting against player empowerment, which is a public relations nightmare in the modern era. Professional sports operates on a simple principle: wins validate everything. All the marketing, all the hype, all the narratives, all the financial success. If you win, it all makes sense. If you win, every decision seems brilliant. If you win, every story becomes legendary. But if you lose, everything collapses. Every criticism becomes, "I told you so." Every investment becomes a cautionary tale. Every achievement becomes overshadowed by failure. Can Shedeur Sanders sustain it? This is the question that hovers over everything. Because for all the financial success, all the branding innovation, all the attention, all the jersey sales, all the media coverage, the NFL ultimately measures value in wins. The game is about winning. Everything else is secondary. You can be the most marketable player in the world, but if you cannot execute when it matters, you are a failure. That is the fundamental truth that nobody can escape. His preseason performance was impressive, but preseason is not the same as regular season. His statistics stood out, but statistics in low-stakes games against rotational players are not the same as statistics against elite competition. His presence in the locker room seemed positive, but maintaining that dynamic while competing for playing time is different than building consensus from the bench. The margin between success and failure is enormous, and everyone knows it. The pressure he faces is unlike anything most athletes experience. He is not just trying to be a good football player. He is not just trying to contribute to his team. He is not just trying to earn a starting job. He is trying to validate an entire philosophy of athlete empowerment. He is trying to prove that a fifth-round pick can overcome criticism from executives who said he cared more about branding than football. He is trying to show that the Nike strategy was correct. He is trying to demonstrate that the precedent established by his deal should become the standard for how the league operates. If Sanders can translate his early promise into consistent performance, then he will not only justify the investment, but he will redefine what is possible for future players. He will prove that the traditional rookie wage scale is outdated. He will prove that Nike's early investment strategy works. He will prove that the criticism from anonymous executives was misguided. He will prove that confidence that looks like arrogance before you prove yourself is just vision once you have proven yourself. He will become a blueprint for how athletes should navigate their careers. But if he struggles, the narrative will shift instantly. Critics will point to him as an example of misplaced priorities. Executives will use his case to resist similar demands from future prospects. The system will attempt to reassert control by framing his narrative as a cautionary tale about the dangers of getting distracted by branding when you should be focused on football. The hype will evaporate. The media attention will disappear. The jersey sales will dry up. The Nike investment will be viewed as a marketing miscalculation, and the entire movement toward athlete equity participation will be set back years. The stakes are that high because individual performance in sports is visible and measurable. Everyone will know if he succeeds or fails. Everyone will be able to point to the statistics as proof. Everyone will be able to use his career trajectory as evidence for whether their philosophy about athlete empowerment is correct or misguided. There is no middle ground where he is moderately successful and everyone shrugs. Either he validates the system or he becomes proof that the system was never sustainable. This is also why the pressure he faces from his team is complicated. The Browns cannot afford for him to fail. If they chose to start him and he struggles significantly, then they wasted a season on an unproven player when they could have developed someone else or made a playoff run. They take reputational damage. The coach takes reputational damage. The general manager takes reputational damage. If they chose not to start him and he becomes successful elsewhere, they face the opposite criticism. Either decision carries enormous risk. But from Shedeur Sanders' perspective, the situation is even more complicated. Every practice is an audition. Every snap is an evaluation. Every mistake is evidence for doubters. Every success is validation for believers. He cannot afford an average game or a mediocre performance. He needs to be consistently excellent to justify the hype. He needs to perform at a level that silences critics. He needs to execute at a level that makes every executive who doubted him regret it. The beauty of great athletes is that they often thrive under pressure. They often perform better when the stakes are highest. They often rise in moments when everyone is watching. But that is true for some athletes, not all. Some athletes wilt under pressure. Some athletes struggle when the microscope is too bright. Some athletes underperform when the expectations are highest. There is no way to know which category Shedeur Sanders falls into until he actually plays regular season football with real stakes. The most important thing to understand about systems is that they change slowly until the moment they change instantly. For decades, the NFL's power structure held firm. Teams controlled athletes. Teams controlled compensation. Teams controlled narratives. Teams controlled who could build brands and how those brands would be built. The system seemed permanent. The system seemed unchangeable. The system seemed designed to last forever. Then a fifth-round pick generated $250 million in jersey sales and changed everything. This story is still in its early chapters. The real consequences have not even arrived yet. Shedeur Sanders has not played a full regular season. He has not proven himself over time. He has not tested the durability of his body against NFL-level competition. He has not faced adversity. He has not experienced failure. Everything that has happened so far could be considered prologue. But here is what is undeniable. The template exists now. The prime equity clause exists. Agents have studied it. Prospects have seen it. Nike has proven that the strategy works. And once something is proven to work, it cannot be forgotten. It cannot be unseen. It cannot be unlearned. The knowledge is now distributed across the industry. The blueprint is now public. Once one precedent is set in professional sports, it rarely stays isolated. History demonstrates this repeatedly. When one player negotiates a certain type of clause, other players demand it. When one team agrees to a structure, other teams face pressure to match it. When the market validates a new approach to compensation, it becomes the new standard. The velocity of change accelerates because once the first domino falls, everyone rushes to adapt before they are left behind. Agents across the league are already studying this situation carefully. They are breaking down exactly how the prime equity clause works. They are calculating how it could be structured differently for different clients. They are understanding the mechanics so they can pitch it to teams in draft negotiations. Some of that groundwork is happening quietly. Some of it is happening in official meetings. But it is happening, and teams know it is happening. The uncomfortable part for the league is realizing that they have limited tools to resist this change. They cannot ban equity clauses without facing massive player backlash and bad publicity. They cannot insist on traditional compensation structures without appearing to be fighting against player empowerment. They cannot slow the spread of this idea without using heavy-handed tactics that generate controversy. They are backed into a corner where the path of least resistance is adapting to the new reality. Nike is already operating as if this future has been decided. They are not hedging their bets. They are not waiting to see if Shedeur Sanders succeeds before committing additional resources. They are scaling his brand globally. They are expanding into product categories beyond apparel. They are positioning him as a cultural icon, not just a football player. They are building infrastructure that assumes he will be important for years to come. They are making decisions that only make sense if they believe in the long-term viability of this model. Consider what happens in the next 3 to 5 years as this unfolds. Consider what happens when a top 5 draft pick demands equity participation in their own brand. Consider what happens when a franchise quarterback walks in and says, "I want to be a business partner in the ecosystem around my name." Consider what happens when other apparel companies see Nike's success and start identifying their own athletes to invest in before the draft. Consider what happens when this model becomes so common that it is no longer novel, just standard operating procedure. The power structure of professional sports shifts permanently. Teams lose their monopoly on athlete development and marketing. Athletes become independent operators, building their own brands parallel to their team responsibilities. Brands develop athletes before teams do. The loyalty structure changes. The incentive structure changes. The entire economic framework of professional sports evolves into something different from what it has been. The league is aware of this. The executives are having uncomfortable conversations. They are realizing that the system they thought was untouchable got rewritten by a rookie who was supposed to sit quietly and wait his turn. They are realizing that their traditional levers of control, salary caps, rookie wage scales, standardized contracts, are becoming less effective at managing the reality of modern athlete compensation. And the most uncomfortable part for the league is that there is very little they can do to stop it. They cannot roll back the clock. They cannot unring the bell. They cannot make Shedeur Sanders and his Nike deal disappear. They cannot prevent other athletes from learning from this template. They cannot prevent agents from pushing for similar structures. They cannot prevent brands from making similar investments. They can only adapt. And adaptation means acknowledging that the power structure has shifted. Adaptation means accepting that athletes will increasingly control their own destinies. Adaptation means understanding that professional sports will evolve into a different model where teams and athletes are more aligned as business partners rather than employers and employees. Somewhere inside a league office, an executive is staring at the $250 million in jersey sales, realizing that the system they built has become outdated. The number does not lie. The market has spoken. The future has arrived.